Welcome to the official United Nations observance of International Women's Day 2021. This year's theme is Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World on the Way to the Generation Equality Forum. Sign language interpretation and closed captioning in English is available in your settings. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Excellencies, speakers, and everyone watching today. My name is Sophia Pierre-Antoine, and I am a young activist from Haiti, currently working at the International Organization for Migration, former co-chair of the board of directors of FRIDA Young Feminist Fund, and a member of the YWCA. And I have the privilege of being your moderator for today's International Women's Days program. Happy International Women's Day to all of you, and thank you so much for joining. Just this time last year, we celebrated the accomplishments since the Fourth World Conference of Women in Beijing over 25 years ago. This year, we'll focus on the present and the future as we recognize the importance, power, and outright need for women's leadership to attain good governance, sustainable development, and progress towards full gender equality in a COVID-19 world. Women's leadership is undeniably key to the COVID-19 response and recovery. Whether as scientists, frontline workers, or at the highest level of governments, where many of the countries that have been successful in responding to the pandemic are headed by women. One of my all-time favorite quotes and personal life motto is by Audre Lorde. She said, and I quote, "I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own." And I think that this pandemic and the inequalities that it brought to light and increased, and the setbacks in human rights that came with it, has really illustrated the essence of this statement. There is hope, however, as feminist activists of all ages, abilities, races, genders, religions, ethnicities, sexualities, and with all the richness that this diversity brings, continue to fight every day for a more just and equal world. I hope that today's program will inspire you and encourage you to do your part. Today's celebration will include a special message by Golden Globe nominated and SAG Award winning actress, philanthropist, and Time's Up founder Eva Longoria, some wonderful musical guests throughout the program, and a special performance by some of Broadway's best at the very end. We will first hear from an array of gender champions celebrating women's leaderships in all its forms. You will then also learn more about the exciting upcoming Generation Equality Forum to be co-hosted by Mexico and France as we officially unveil the key initiatives of the Generation Equality Action Coalitions and the Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action Compact. It is a privilege and honor to introduce our first speaker to open today's program. Since taking office, he has prioritized the dismantling of gender inequality both within and outside of the UN. He has significantly increased the representation of women at the highest level of the UN, recognizing that the meaningful inclusion of women in decision-making increases effectiveness and productivity, brings new perspectives and solutions to the table, unlocks greater resources, and strengthens efforts across all three pillars of the UN's work: human rights, peace and security, and development. Please join us in welcoming the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. António Guterres.
Today, we celebrate the women of the world who are leading their countries and communities through the urgent crisis caused by COVID-19. Over the past year, countries with women leaders are among those that have suffered fewer deaths and put themselves on track for recovery. Women's organizations have filled crucial gaps in the provision of services and information on the pandemic, especially at the local level. And women peace builders have played a vital role in public health messaging in low-trust and conflict-affected communities. 70% of frontline health and care workers are women, many from racially and ethnically marginalized groups and at the bottom of the economic ladder. Yet, even as women have played critical roles during the pandemic, we have seen a rollback in hard-won advances in women's rights. The regression harms women and girls above all, but it also harms everyone and all our work for peace and prosperity. In this decade of action to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, we must turn things around. As we look to this year's Generation Equality Forums in Mexico City and Paris, we have many challenges to overcome. Too often, services are delivered by women, but decisions are made by men. Just 22 countries have a woman as head of state or government, just 21% of ministers are women, and women parliamentarians make up less than 25% of national legislators. Women have an equal right to speak with authority on the decisions that affect their lives. This is how we will ensure that decisions are inclusive and reflect the needs of the entire population. This is how we will rebuild from a pandemic that has made gender inequality worse, that has pushed more women into poverty, out of jobs, and away from access to educational and medical services, including for sexual and reproductive health. This is how we will solve the urgent challenges of our time, from the pandemic to climate change, to deepening inequalities, conflict, and democratic backsliding. Gender equality is essentially a question of power. But equal power will not happen in itself. This is still a male-dominated world with a male-dominated culture. We need to work together with vision and determination to make equality happen. I'm proud that we have achieved gender parity in UN leadership posts for the first time in history. We must transform social norms. We must put in place laws and policies to support women in leadership, including special measures and quotas with ambitious targets, and do far more to appoint women to high-level positions. We must tackle violence against women, both online and offline, so that women's voices are no longer silenced, especially in public life. We must increase access to financing for women candidates, women's organizations, and feminist movements. And we must support women leaders in all their diversity and abilities, including young women, migrant women, indigenous women, women with disabilities, women of color, and LGBTIQ+. The COVID-19 has been a calamity for the world and for women and girls. But it has also forced a reckoning with global inequalities, fragilities, and entrenched gender discrimination. Women must be at the center of the recovery as we make the course corrections that the pandemic has highlighted so vividly. This is a job for all of us. I look forward to working with all of you to advance women's leadership, to achieve women's rights, and to build a future based on equality and dignity for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary General. It was great to hear you highlight the role of women and young women peace builders in fighting COVID, the role of women healthcare workers, especially as many of them are migrants, the importance of ensuring access to sexual and reproductive health, and of course, the need to finance feminist movements. You are and continue to be an inspiration to the world. Our next speaker has made gender equality and the empowerment of women one of his top priorities during his tenure, and has formed a gender advisory group on gender equality and women's empowerment to inform and help foster gender equality during the 75th session of the UN General Assembly. Please welcome the President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Volkan Bozkir.
Since the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action was adopted 25 years ago, we have made some progress in advancing women's rights, yet no member state has achieved gender equality. In 2021, 2/3 of all illiterate adults are women, and the digital divide threatens to leave even more women behind. Labor market segregation persists, as does the gender pay gap. Women still shoulder the disproportionate burden of unpaid care, with the so-called second shift now overlapping for many women who are working from home as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Furthermore, the shadow pandemic of gender-based violence rages behind closed doors during lockdowns. This decade of action to implement the Sustainable Development Goals is our chance to course correct. Here, in the General Assembly, I'm working to mainstream gender equality with the support of the newly established Gender Advisory Group. I urge all member states to mainstream gender equality through women's participation as it is clear that women's unequal representation in decision-making processes, including COVID-19 recovery planning, has led to the specific needs of women being overlooked. For today, only 25% of parliamentarians are women. Yet 2.5 billion women and girls are affected by discriminatory laws. We must expand space for civil society leaders and feminist advocates in decision-making at all levels and end violence against women in politics and public life. On this International Women's Day, I call on all member states to guarantee women what I think of as the 5 Ps. First, personal autonomy. Second, equal participation in decision-making and politics. Third, gender-responsive policies. Fourth, equal pay and access to the labor market. 5, an end to impunity for perpetrators of gender-based violence. It is up to each of us to uphold the rights of all women and to make generation equality a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And thank you for reminding member states of the importance of gender mainstreaming and the 5 Ps. All of you watching at home or at work today, did you know that CSW is right around the corner? Next week, we'll kick off the 65th session of the Annual Commission on the Status of Women. My first CSW, back in 2015, I remember being in such awe of the sheer power of having so many feminist activists from different backgrounds in the same space with a common goal, and finding ways to work with governments and advocate to shape their commitment. The priority theme for this year's session is women's full and effective participation in decision-making in public life, as well as the elimination of violence, for achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls, a theme that is closely tied to what we are celebrating today. We are pleased to have the chair of the 65th session of the Commission share some remarks with us today. Let's hear from His Excellency, Mher Margaryan.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, friends. I'm very pleased to join you today on the occasion of the United Nations observance of International Women's Day 2021. As you have heard, this year's theme for International Women's Day is closely aligned with the priority theme of the upcoming 65th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, which will begin next week. Traditionally, this observance gives us the opportunity to reflect on the gains made so far for women and girls globally, while also recognizing that more work needs to be done. However, 2020 has been a watershed year in modern world history. The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted all our lives and disproportionately impacted women and girls across the world. The effects of the pandemic can be seen across the many dimensions of their lives. It has aggravated the suffering of women and girls in situations of conflicts, humanitarian crisis, and other fragile contexts. Maternal mortality, gender-based violence, and the burdens of unpaid care work on women are significantly increasing as a result of the crisis. While all students alike are impacted by school closures, we know that women and girls who are pulled out of educational institutions are less likely to return than men and boys. Female workers are rapidly losing employment opportunities as a result of the pandemic's devastation of national economies. Women in the informal sector are even more negatively impacted. The COVID-19 crisis puts the priority theme of CSW 65, which is women's full and effective participation and decision-making in public life, as well as the elimination of violence for achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls, into sharper relief. Even beyond the effects of COVID-19, women continue to be underrepresented in decision-making and public life, and violence against women in all its forms is rampant. The statistical data shows that women are the heads of state or government in only 21 countries. 119 countries have never had a woman leader. At the current rate, parity at the highest levels of power will not be reached for another 130 years. Beyond the headlines, women continue to face many obstacles in public life and are marginalized from equally and fully participating at all levels of decision-making positions. We cannot but think of the millions of female workers and caretakers in almost all dimensions of public, private, and economic life who, whilst enduring the effects of the crisis, are working tirelessly to uphold their families and their communities, often without recognition or compensation. In the past year, women have also offered new models of effective and inclusive leadership, be it in politics and governance or healthcare and emergency response. At the end of 2020, the Harvard Business Review released an assessment which rated women more positively on 13 out of 19 competencies that comprise overall leadership effectiveness in times of deep crisis. In the same assessment, men were rated more positively on one competency, technical professional expertise. Women rated higher everywhere else on human relations skills, such as motivating a workforce and on achieving better collaboration and teamwork. It is critical that the global response to and recovery from COVID-19 crisis actively engages women and harnesses their unique capacities for leadership. Without the leadership and equal participation of women, the road to recovery from the pandemic will be even harder. To lead, women must be educated, allowed to reach their full potential, and manage their responsibilities effectively. As we mark International Women's Day, I call on all of us to take concerted action to accelerate women and girls' leadership and participation to ensure that together we transform the world and shape a more equal future for humankind. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And thank you for mentioning the burden of unpaid care work on women significantly increasing during COVID. I'm sure many of us were able to see this, even within our own households, as women's invisible labor grew, from childcare and homeschooling, to caring for ill or elderly family members, to household chores, while trying to navigate employment or unemployment burdens. Now, it is a joy to introduce you to the next speaker, the former Deputy President of South Africa, who has led UN Women since 2013. This quote from her says it all about her focus, dedication, and resolve. And I quote, "Now is the time for giant steps. We cannot afford baby steps anymore. It cannot be incremental change. We want change that is fast, but also it must be change that lasts." We welcome these remarks from the Undersecretary General of the UN and Executive Director of UN Women, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka.
Excellency António Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations. Excellency Volkan, President of the General Assembly. Excellency Mher, Margaryan, Chair of the Commission on the Status of Women. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On this International Women's Day 2021, we stand on a crossroads as we ponder the recovery from a pandemic that has had disproportionate impact on women and girls. We also face the challenge of underrepresentation of women in key institutions, some of which will be responsible for the recovery. The recovery will not be adequate and inclusive if it does not include women in decisions that affect their lives. As we go into the Commission on the Status of Women, we have an opportunity to call for representation of women in all decision-making bodies. We only have 13% of parliaments that are gender equal. 119 countries have never had a woman leader. We also have 14 gender equal cabinets in the world. These are all important bodies that will be making decisions about the future of the world and will be guiding this recovery. We therefore have a responsibility to call out on the representation of women. In 2020, when we marked 25 years of the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action, heads of states lamented the underrepresentation of women in their countries. This is the time to address this underrepresentation and in the agreed conclusions of CSW to make bold recommendations. We will also have generation equality, which will help in taking measures and steps that will help the recovery and the implementation of SDGs. This, again, is an opportunity that cannot be missed. Exclusion of women in decisions that affect their life is bad corporate governance. It should not be allowed. This is why, at this point in 2021, when we are at crossroads, we have to bring this to an end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Executive Director. And thank you for calling out the lack of women in most countries' decision-making bodies. As you said, exclusion of women in decisions that affect their lives is bad governance and should not be allowed. We look forward to hearing from the Executive Director again at the close of today's observance. Next, we're about to hear from one young woman for whom the word impossible does not exist. We know how important it is that young women and girls are encouraged to enter STEM fields. That's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. When ventilators were becoming scarce in Afghanistan during the outbreak of COVID, Somaya Faruqi, who was 17 years old at the time, and the rest of the Afghan girls' robotics team developed a low-cost and open-source ventilator prototype to support their country's healthcare system. Somaya is one of the many remarkable young women around the world who are contributing to the COVID-19 response. Let's hear from her now.
Excellencies, respected dignitaries, men, women, and especially young girls around the world. There are millions of girls around the globe who are curious. Girls love science, number, engineering, and technology. But who are deterred by harmful gender stereotypes, by lack of support, and also unequal access to education and technology to pursue a future in the STEM field. It's unfortunate that even in 2021, girls face many barriers in their pursuit of education, especially when they choose to study STEM. Globally, 132 million girls remain out of school, the number that harms every individual living in a society, including men and boys. Investing on girls and their education is a big benefit to all, and how else can we shape our future if not together? A common stereotype that we face as girls and women in STEM is that we are genius. What I would like to say to every girl that listening today is you don't need to be genius in order to succeed as an engineer, a doctor, a researcher, and a mathematician. What girls need is equal right and opportunity to study, and also encouragement of their family members, teachers, society to pursue their interests. We need freedom to experiment, to learn, and be creative. Engineering for me is about endless possibilities. It's about designing new technologies that help all people. It's what our team, Girls Robotic team in Afghanistan, did 1 year ago. As COVID-19 cases increased in Afghanistan and also the ventilator were becoming scarce in our country, so we prototyped an open-source low-cost ventilator to support COVID-19 patients. It wasn't an easy task for us. We didn't have enough money and also market access to get the parts, so we used card parts instead. Through the support of digital citizen funds and our community, we built many robots like UV robot, spray robot, and also an online game, and another innovation approach that enabled us to fight with coronavirus. It took about 5 months to finalize these devices, and finally we did it. STEM is for all girls around the world, especially girls with big ideas to change the world. On this International Women's Day, I would like to say to every girl that believe on yourself and have faith on your abilities in STEM and education. And never give up and do your best.
Thank you, Somaya. You are such a motivation to all of us. You prove what difference one person, or in your case, one team, can make. You saw a need in your community, and you and your team literally invented a solution with the resources that you had available around you. Thank you also for mentioning the importance of giving girls the opportunity to study in STEM and have the space to experiment and to be creative. We must have faith in our abilities. Well said, Somaya. And now, it's time for some entertainment and a chance to meet another incredible young changemaker. Our first musical performance today is an inspiring 13-year-old singer-songwriter, and actress from Atlanta, Georgia, in the US, who overcame a serious illness when she was only 4 years old, resulting in her needing a kidney transplant, which she received from her mom just 7 years ago. Along with being an ambassador for the National Kidney Foundation, Sepsis Alliance, and World Women Foundation, she is also known for being the youngest runner-up ever on America's Got Talent and the only contestant to receive 2 golden buzzers. Today, she will be performing her new single, Looking Up. Please give a warm welcome to Angelica Hale.
I'm just a girl, you may think I'm at a disadvantage, going out into the world, but I think I'm gonna take my chances. Cause no one ever changed a thing by being too afraid of a dream. So if I'm ever feeling down, I know that it's part of the journey. I look up to the stars in the sky, I look up and I feel so inspired to push every limit like all of the women before me. I look up in the face of my fear, won't give up till they know I was here. Won't stand in the shadows, cause she fought the battles before me. And she's looking up to and she's looking up to Use the magic of your voice and tell them what you stand for. Cause we don't change the world when we whisper, we change it when we roar. If you take the time to see, then all you gotta do is believe. There are highs and there are lows, but the power's in finding the beauty. Oh yeah, I look up to the stars in the sky. I look up and I feel so inspired to push every limit like all of the women before me. I look up in the face of my fears, won't give up till they know I was here. Won't stand in the shadows, cause she fought the battles before me. And she's looking up, I am her and she is me. The ladder keeps on growing. Oh, then one day you become the hero that keeps it going. I look up to the stars in the sky. I look up and I feel so inspired to push every limit like all of the women before me. I look up in the face of my fears, won't give up so they know I was here. Won't stand in the shadows, cause she fought the battles before me. And she's looking up too. Hi everyone, I am so excited to be here with you all today. Thank you so much to UN Women for having me here and allowing me to perform for you guys. I've been singing ever since I was very, very little, and to me, music is life. This song, Looking Up, is extremely personal to me, and I'm so excited that I'm able to release this song to the world today on International Women's Day 2021. I believe that we all need a hero to look up to and that you're never too young to start pursuing your dreams. This past year has been a big struggle and, with COVID-19 affecting so many people all over the world. But I'm encouraged and inspired by the many amazing women that I've seen lead the way by contributing so much on the front lines of this pandemic to leading much of the successful vaccine development. I believe that us women are strong and that we can accomplish anything that we set our minds to. Thank you guys again so much for having me here today, and enjoy the rest of the program.
Wow, what an incredible voice. I have chills. I hope we all feel inspired to push all the limits, like all of the women before us, and not give up. That's such a powerful message. Thank you, Angelica. Thank you for your boundless energy and the difference you continue to make for people around the world. Speaking of people who make a difference around the world, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge all of you in the audience who have joined us here today to celebrate the rights of all women and girls in all their diversity. I also want to thank the staff, consultants, interns, and volunteers of UN Women and of the UN as a whole who work every day to make the world a better place. Few people realize that UN Women is only 10 years old, and in those 10 years, it has already accomplished so much around the world. Even its creation itself was such a victory and came from the hard work of feminists who had advocated for years. So I just want to take a moment to recognize this and thank them and thank all of you for all your efforts. We are now moving into the next part of today's celebration, which will be a panel discussion moderated by a renowned disability rights activist. Eddie Ndopu is a South African award-winning, internationally acclaimed activist, humanitarian, and changemaker. Eddie was diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy at age 2 and given only 5 years to live. Now, at age 30, he has been appointed by the Secretary General of the UN as one of 17 eminent global advocates for the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and aspired to be the first wheelchair user to travel into outer space. We are absolutely thrilled to have you join us today. Eddie, over to you.
Thank you, Sophia. I am absolutely delighted to be moderating this really important discussion today, women's leadership in a COVID-19 world. It's no secret that the global health crisis has illuminated for all of us both the centrality of women's leadership and their contributions to society, but also, and perhaps more importantly, the ways in which this constituency and segment of society continues to bear a disproportionate burden. As we look towards the global recovery, it is really important that we amplify the voices of women so that the recovery is truly inclusive and truly sustainable. Joining me today are some remarkable women leaders who are really ushering us in a new discourse around what that recovery might look like. I'd like to kick off with a discussion with Her Excellency Katrin Jakobsdottir, the Prime Minister of Iceland. Thank you, Madam Prime Minister, for joining us. You have been a champion for gender parity and gender equality for a very long time. I would like you to really help us make sense of the current historical moment that we find ourselves in. Could you speak a little bit about what is often referred to as the parallel pandemic or the shadow pandemic, the ways in which women and girls continue to really be disproportionately impacted?
Well, thank you. And it's a great honor to be here with you today. So thank you for having this discussion, which is important because, as you say so rightly, we have a lot of dark sides of this pandemic you know, not that this pandemic has a bright side, but the dark sides maybe that we aren't talking too much about is the pandemic really concerning violence against women. We are seeing a backlash when it comes to domestic violence. We are seeing that here in Iceland, and we are seeing it everywhere in the world, really. And we have also seen an increase in poverty among women, and we have also seen women carry a disproportionate amount of responsibility in taking care of vulnerable relatives, family members, and others, doing this really in unpaid work, what we could call maybe the caring economy, where women really take these burdens of caring for the vulnerable groups around them. So this is a dark side of this pandemic, which is really affecting gender equality. But at the same time, because we must remain optimistic and we must remain hopeful, we are also seeing this pandemic, COVID-19, showing us the importance of women who are the frontline people in the health sector, really going through the day, taking risks to really carry really the responsibilities of the health sector, and showing us really the importance of the work they are doing every day. So I think one of the lessons we can take from this pandemic is really the importance of women working in the healthcare sector, in the hospitals, everywhere in the front line. And it's so important that we take that lesson and really stand guard for all these systems around the world, which are so important for all our societies. And also, we need to remember that often, even though that the majority of healthcare workers are women, decisions are often made by men. And this is one of the things that we need to do. We need to have more women making decisions in that sector as well as any other sector.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. I'm pleased to turn the conversation over now to the young activists that we have in our midst. Shie Bastida, one of the leading voices around climate justice. She is a key figure in the Fridays for Future movement and has really been at the forefront of this discourse. Shie, thank you for joining us. You are a climate justice activist, and at the age of 18, you have really underscored the importance of intersectionality in this movement. Could you speak a little bit about the difference between climate justice and the climate action discourse? Are those two separate discourses? What are some of the differences, and what does that mean in the context of the fight for gender equality?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for opening this space to share, my thoughts, and thank you so much to the Prime Minister for sharing her thoughts, which were really insightful. And I think you have asked one of the most important questions there is in the climate movement, because there has been a lot of discourse, especially at high level, institutions, governments, about climate action, which basically means looking at the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, how we can draw down the carbon, move on to cleaner technology. And even though this conversation is really important to have, and we really need it to lower our overall emissions and our temperature, we need to also think of how people are affected locally. So what does that mean? We need to think about where pollution is being targeted in. We need to think about the areas that are most disproportionately affected. We need to think of the fact that there will be a climate refugee crisis. We need to think about the fact that women and girls in countries that are facing water scarcity are the most affected because of less access to sanitary products, to sanitation, and sanitary facilities. In countries where it is a culture for women to go get water, these distances are becoming longer, more tedious, and it makes them more vulnerable to dangers. So there are a lot of layers to the climate justice discourse, which basically means that you have to be conscious not only about the climate crisis and how the systems in the climate environment need to be treated, but also climate, social justice, how we can further our rights, our gender equality, immigration visibility, indigenous rights in the fight to building a better world.
Thank you so much. And now I am delighted to turn the conversation to a remarkable multi-award winning Pan-African activist, my dear friend Aya Chebi, the outgoing African Union envoy on youth. Aya, welcome to this conversation. It's truly a pleasure to be in conversation with you. Of course, this dialogue is happening against the backdrop of the International Day for Women. And as we think about this discussion within the broader context of COVID-19, could you speak a little bit about the work that you've done around the intersection of young people and women, that sort of intersectional approach, and how important that will be as we think about the global recovery, the role of young women's leadership specifically?
Thank you so much, Eddie. It's such a pleasure to celebrate Women's Day with you, with a young feminist, you know, and a ally for us. In terms of our work with young women, I think one of the main outcomes that I'm proud of that we have led last year is the Africa Young Women Beijing Plus 25 Manifesto, which we convened about 1,500 African youth from, I think, over 40 countries together in regional consultation and discussions and focus groups. And they came up with 10 concrete recommendations, not only of, you know, the word before COVID-19 pandemic, but also what the inequalities that has been exacerbated by the pandemics are. And I think they were very clear about the demands from economic justice to equal pay, to the criminalization of gender-based violence, to end gender discrimination, sexual reproductive health, mental health rights, education, and so on. And I think it is important now that young people are really motivated and driving equality already. Young women are at the forefront of it, is that we provide the platforms for them to do that. Because I don't think the issue now is whether young women are organized or motivated, which has been always a question. But I think what is important now is our spaces, the intergovernmental space, the table. Is it diverse enough? Is it welcoming for the young women with disability, for the displaced, for the young women refugee, for the offline young people? Is the spaces or platforms we have, are they fragmented and work in silos, or are they harmonized? So I think it's about really us, in retrospect, thinking of the tools of engagement and maintaining that engagement, because now a lot of young women are also into this space, and we don't want to lose their motivations to continue this fight.
All right. So turning to you, Madam Prime Minister, about this theme of women being at the decision-making table, could you speak about what that means in the context of the global recovery? Of course, in many parts of the world, you know, we're still discussing vaccine rollout and the slow pace of that. But in this discussion around reimagining the world and reimagining the new normal and what the post-COVID world might look like, could you speak a little bit more about what we need to do to ensure that equitable representation and that women's leadership is central to this discourse?
Well, I think if this pandemic shows us anything, it's the importance of having both men and women around the table to make decisions. And we have seen that in many different countries, and my country included, is that when we have both men and women at the table, better decisions are made. And it's my firm conviction and truth that we see better decisions made for society, for the economy, for the environment, when we have both men and women at the table. So I think, and this is really an ongoing struggle around the world. Why we haven't really reached gender equality, why we are still struggling for the SDG number 5 of perfect equality between men and women. And I think when we look at just the results, how countries are dealing with the pandemic, we absolutely see that having an equal representation is one of the beneficial factors for having better decisions made. So that's definitely a lesson to learn from the pandemic.
Turning to you, Xie, flowing from that acknowledgement of the relationship between social justice and the ecological breakdown of the planet, what does that specifically mean in the context of the lived experiences of women and girls everywhere? How do we ensure that women's voices are adequately amplified in the context of climate justice?
So, in my time as a climate activist, what I've seen is that the most amount of organizers are actually young girls. Just in the organization that I co-founded, We Earth Initiative, over 90% of the participants who volunteered and who make up our main organizing team are girls from around the world who are willing to put in the work for a restorative future. And I think that this is a very important conversation between the need for both feminine and masculine energy in a space, because both men and women can have feminine and masculine qualities. And that is what makes, that is what will make the movement flourish. The fact that we have two perspectives, and right now that those perspectives are being very readily embodied by women and girls, but we need to also teach our male counterparts to be able to carry those values as well, because there are values of regeneration, values of imagination, values of not conforming to any limitations that we have to solving the crisis. So, in all, I feel like in the climate movement, the most important thing that we need to advocate for right now is education on climate justice and just education for women and girls, which is one of the solutions that can help us advance the most in our climate goals.
Turning to you, Aya, you've said something that really just struck me. It's about thinking about the tools of engagement. It's no longer a question of whether or not young people, young women specifically, are motivated or interested or have the capacity. I think we've really graduated from that discourse. But are the tools fit for purpose? Aya, I mean, we've spoken a lot about the need to reimagine the world. We are rethinking what we mean by normal. And so one would imagine that there are implications for the public policy now. So could you speak a little bit more about whether the current tools that we have are fit for purpose, whether they're actually going to be able to deliver on the kind of meaningful representation that you speak about?
We made a lot of progress, and me and you, that the past decade we've been fighting for space. So everything we've been fighting for, we want a seat at the table, we want youth spaces, we want to have our own consultations, our own advisory groups, and that's what has been created. But that also kind of isolated youth issues and young women voices, and it's not mainstreamed. And something I always talk about the past 2 years is intergenerational co-leadership, and I think that's where the tools of engagement should become. Our spaces should all become intergenerational. There is no one generation or the other that can fix the world issues. We are inheriting the generational injustices, and there needs to be some form of generational accountability. And so I think the tools that have been created so far has been to kind of like, how do we engage this group? How do we provide a space for this group? But it ended up isolating these voices into different groups that then have their own agenda. And back to your first question of intersectionality, we ended up not having that intersectional movement. And I think for the feminist movement, for the movement to fight for gender equity and equality to succeed, it needs to be intersectional and it needs to be intergenerational. So what I really hope to see as tools to engage meaningfully young people, to maintain their engagement for next generations, is that we move away from this idea that we have the young women spaces, we have the senior women, we have the young people, we have the leadership, the institution. It's really created this distrust. So for us to build this trust, we need young people to co-chair meetings. We need young people to be, at presidential level, at the county level, at the council level, at parliamentarian seats. We need really this intergenerational collaboration and co-leadership to work, not only at the policy discourse, but really on the ground. We need to really see the young people not only at the table or having a seat, but actually taken seriously and making decisions with other generations. So their wisdom and our innovation, this is how it's going to work. And the pandemic is a great example of that. If we have given young people the seat they deserved and the tools, maybe we would have handled this pandemic differently.
Absolutely. I love that. Finally, Prime Minister, we're having this discussion against the backdrop of International Women's Day, and there are emerging leaders, young people, young women, specifically watching and listening to this conversation. If you could impart wisdom or advice for young people, young women who are watching and want to follow in your footsteps, what message would you leave them with?
Well, I think, the most important thing is to build a society which really functions for both men and women. That women and men take equal responsibility in raising children, that we have good early education system, that we have a society which works for families so that people don't have to choose between having a career and having a family. And this is something that has been important for me, and I look to women of older generations who were fighting for exactly this: shared parental leave between parents, early education for children, to increase the possibilities for women of participation in the labor market. And we need to have a society which really has equal opportunities for all, men and women. I think one of the systematic failures that we need to address, and one of the reasons for that we have still societies which don't have gender equality, is the fact that we are still dealing with gender-based violence. I mentioned this as the dark side of the pandemic: an increase in gender-based violence, an increase in domestic violence. And this is a systematic problem that we need to address systematically. We need to start early on in kindergartens talking about gender, talking about violence against women, and do not think of it as something that just comes naturally, because we can actually make that change. And when we erase violence against women, we will move fast towards gender equality. So this is a very firm conviction of mine. And I think the young people today, and I'm not one of them, but I think they are really ready to make that change. And I think we have seen that when it comes to the climate crisis and the very strong voice of young people around the world. I think it's very important that that strong voice will also resonate when it comes to issues of gender equality, because this generation has an enormously open mind and also great opportunities to be that change that we need.
Fantastic. Madam Prime Minister, thank you so much for your time. I know you're short on time, but we are truly grateful for your insights, and particularly against the backdrop of women's leadership in COVID-19. Your insight is tremendously valued, so I thank you so much. Chie, I'd like to pose the same question to you that I posed to the Prime Minister. We are having this discussion on International Women's Day, and there are many young leaders, women, men, who are watching and who've been inspired by your journey and your advocacy. If you were to impart knowledge and leave a message for this generation of young leaders, what would you say, as somebody that's been in this space, who continues to be in this space and agitate for meaningful change? What is it that you would say to people who are also just as passionate about seeking to make change?
Well, thank you so much for that question. And I have two things to say about this. The first one is that we are usually told that we need a seat at the table, that we need to be invited to certain spaces in order for our voice to make a difference. And the truth is that, there's times where we need to make our own tables, our own discussion environments, our own safe environments. And that is really what, a lot of activists have been doing around the world, creating their own chapters, creating chapters that have love in them and that have innovation in them. So that is my first advice. If there is no place where people are inviting you because of whatever reason, you can create your own and you can start being a leader because it's in you. The second thing that I would say is that when I look at my upbringing, I know that my mother was a really big figure, both my mom and my dad, but they were both really big figures in kind of validating my hopes and dreams. So the importance of validating women's and girls' hopes and dreams is really important. So I would look at women and girls around you and tell them that their dreams are valid, that their goals are possible, that you will be there to support them. Because I think that aspect of supporting others and being cooperative in kind of framing what world we want to see is one of the most important things that we have. So when you have found your light and your power, you have to share it because that is contagious. So those are the two biggest advices that I have. Don't give up. We're here for you. I'm here for you. And you will be there for many women and girls to come.
Fantastic. Shea Bastida, thank you so much for being in conversation with me today. And I echo your sentiment that we are able to create our own tables and we have the capacity to do so. And it is important that we validate one another as we pursue making change. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Finally, I've asked each of the previous speakers this question that I'm about to ask you, and you are the outgoing AU envoy on youth. You are an activist and a leader in your own right, and we all look up to you. And so I wonder, what is your message for the young women and the young people who are watching this conversation, who have followed your career and really look up to your leadership style? What would you say to young people right now? I know everybody asks for advice, but maybe what is the message, having been in this role and now going on to do other things? What wisdom would you impart on the people watching?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of reflections the past 2 weeks on this, because I feel like now I'm actually more valuable to activism than I was before. I come from, an activism background, revolutionary background. I was part of the revolution in my country. In 2011, we finished a dictatorship. We moved into democratization, and I have been a very noisy activist. I'm on the street, I'm anti-establishment. And then it was a complete shift and a challenge to me to move into the system, inside the system, into the intergovernmental space. And I think part of what I said about intergenerational co-leadership, it really helped me to navigate this space, that there were, older women, the elders, the senior women who would really help me or trust me to co-lead with them, who would open the door when gatekeepers close it, and guarantee that I am there, respected and trusted and taken seriously. Because it doesn't mean, unfortunately, in our days, that you have a title as a youth envoy, whatever your rank, as long as you're young and female, it's like a double crime, and you have to navigate it every day. It's a lived experience. So for me, I think it's important now that we as young people re-strategize. I don't think it's enough for us to just take to the streets and demand change, which incredibly young women have been courageous to do that. In Namibia, we've seen it with the Shut It All Down movement. In Sierra Leone, in South Africa, young women have been at the forefront, even within COVID pandemic, demanding to end gender-based violence. But I don't think that's enough. That is necessary, that is important. But I think now we need to look inward as a youth movement, as the feminist movement, to re-strategize. How do we make change from the community level to the policy level? And how do we hold these leaders accountable and also be within the system, not only out of the system? But I think for young women, I mean, my peers, my sisters, I have these conversations with a lot of my mentees every day, and my message remains the same. Your power is your radical self. Find it and occupy that seat you deserve at the table. We go through a lot of hardships as young women every single day. It's a lived experience for us on the bus, on the street, in the workplace, online, in the digital space. We're harassed every day, and it takes a toll on us. And I think the only thing we can remain resilient with it is really hold on to that power, really find that voice and claim it. So whatever space we are in, we remain resilient and we remain powerful and we remain badass. And I think that's how we're gonna move this movement forward.
I adore you, and yes. You know, existing in our full, powerful, radical selves. Thank you so much, my friend, for your leadership. Thank you for joining me in conversation today. You truly are a beacon of light for all of us to emulate. And I am just so incredibly honored and inspired to call you a friend and a peer and a comrade in the struggle for equality. So thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure and a delight to speak with you.
Thank you so much, Eddie. Thank you. The fight continues.
And now we turn the conversation over to Her Excellency Élisabeth Gómez-Alcorta, the Minister of Women, Gender and Diversity from Argentina, to share her thoughts on women's leadership with us today. The minister is a lawyer, a professor, and a politician with a long-standing commitment to advancing gender equality. We asked her to share with us, and especially the young women and men watching today, how her background has influenced her leadership style, and specifically to say something about what qualities she deems essential to good leadership and why it is so essential to have more women leaders at the table to ensure that policy making is gender responsive. Here is her answer.
En relación a la pregunta, me parece que siempre las propias biografías nos condicionan en el buen sentido los tipos de liderazgos que ejercemos. Creo que hay dos cuestiones que me parecen que son fundamentales, que no tiene que ver tanto lo profesional o en términos de profesora o de abogada, sino más bien en términos de trabajadora y de militante. Efectivamente, eso sí condiciona en el buen sentido para mí, teniendo en cuenta que eso permite centralmente generar liderazgos desde la cercanía, desde la empatía, desde pensar al otro o a la otra siempre situado o situada, y trabajar centralmente con algo que para mí es clave, que es la circulación de la información, porque sabemos que en general otros liderazgos, centralmente los masculinos, tienden a concentrar la información como modo de concentrar el poder. La horizontalidad es clave en ese sentido, porque una vez que uno circula la información, permite centralmente que cada uno y cada una pueda intervenir en la realidad con eso. Creo que las principales diferencias están vinculadas, o hacia donde uno apunta es a trabajar desde la ética del cuidado, a diferencia de la ética masculina, que es la ética de la justicia. Esa ética del cuidado es la que centralmente nos permite el trabajo en red y el pensarnos en red. Nosotras, las mujeres, trabajamos y construimos en redes o de forma colectiva, de forma comunitaria, porque es el modo más centralmente en el que históricamente hemos pensado. en cuanto a cuál podría llegar a ser la estrategia para otras lideresas en términos de cómo asegurar que se pueda transversalizar la perspectiva de género en las políticas públicas. Creo que durante muchísimo tiempo, durante muchísimas décadas, las cuestiones vinculadas a las desigualdades de género y a las violencias siempre fueron temas menores para la política, para la agenda política. Era un tema de las mujeres, que hablábamos las mujeres y que pensábamos las mujeres. Es el momento de centralmente desentrañar el nudo estructural, y ese nudo estructural es eminentemente político. Digo esto en términos de si pensamos que la mitad de la población mundial vive en un enorme nivel de desigualdad en relación a la otra mitad, pura y exclusivamente basadas en el género, ya ni siquiera hablar de clase, que sigue siendo para mí una categoría analítica absolutamente vigente para la política, pero en términos de raza, en términos de discapacidad, en términos etarios, pero solamente poder desentrañar esa desigualdad es lo que lo hace una categoría y una lucha eminentemente política, y por eso efectivamente es el modo que tenemos para asegurar que en todos los otros ámbitos de las políticas públicas puedan tomar el tema y pensarlo desde una perspectiva de género. Creo que el desafío es enorme, pero sabemos que somos muchísimas las que estamos dando estos pasos y que nos ligamos a otras que lo dieron antes, y seguramente estaremos ligadas a las que lo den en el futuro.
Well, this was a truly insightful and remarkable discussion about women's leadership in the COVID-19 world. I think what is absolutely clear is that the stakes are high and we need to act with urgency if we are to really make good on the promise of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, specifically on Goal 5 in terms of gender equality. We must adopt new methodologies, move forward with intersectionality, move forward in a really integrated fashion that really delivers on the promise of ensuring that nobody gets left behind. My name is Eddie Ndokwu, and it has been an absolute joy and pleasure being with you today. I thank you.
Yes, thank you so much to all panelists and to Eddie for this rich panel. Really, really excellent panel, which gave us so much to think about, and I'm sure it inspired all of you watching right now. Just fantastic. Thank you. Well, it's now time for us to have another exciting performance. The Pihcintu Multinational Girls Chorus was founded 15 years ago to give new arrivals to the US a safe and secure place to find their new voices and to develop the skills needed to succeed. Since then, hundreds of refugee girls have experienced the joy of singing as one and gained the confidence to become contributing members and leaders of their community. Let's hear it for the Pihcintu Multinational Girls Chorus.
May we find a way
I keep getting so moved during this celebration. Like, wow, this was such a beautiful song. It had such a strong message. Let us be, let us be free, let us be forever free. Thank you for this call, Pihcintu Chorus, and for writing this song, especially for today's event. Yeah. It's now my great pleasure to introduce part 2 of today's event, which will focus on the Generation Equality Forum. We are very excited to lift the curtain on this year's Generation Equality Forum, what we expect to be the largest intergenerational and multi-stakeholder gathering for gender equality since the 4th Conference on Women in Beijing in 1995, and an inflection point in advancing women's rights. After this segment, we will have an exciting panel discussion on the Generation Equality Forum Action Coalitions, a message by Eva Longoria, and another performance by some of Broadway's best voices. As we all know, the government of Mexico has been an important gender equality champion and has put gender equality at the front and center of its national development priorities. As a co-host for the upcoming Generation Equality Forum, we are so happy to have with us His Excellency Marcelo Ebrard, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mexico, to hear more about the preparations for the Generation Equality Forum taking place in Mexico in a few weeks.
Este 8 de marzo será recordado en la historia como un momento de gran trascendencia y también como una paradoja histórica. ¿Y cuál es esta? Bueno, vamos a conmemorar y a estar presentes en un foro global convocado para construir la igualdad de género, para proteger, garantizar el respeto de los derechos y las libertades de las mujeres en todo el mundo y, en pocas palabras, organizar otra sociedad más justa, más igualitaria. Pero al mismo tiempo tenemos un impacto devastador de la pandemia en materia de género. Ha sido lo que hemos experimentado este último año, sobre todo en los países en vías de desarrollo. Ha sido un retroceso impresionante en lo que se había alcanzado para acercarnos al ideal de la igualdad de género. Por lo tanto, ahora tenemos que hacer muchísimo más. Ahora tenemos que redoblar todos los esfuerzos, intensificar lo que estamos haciendo para colocarnos como punto de partida en un punto similar al que teníamos cuando diseñamos este foro, cuando la sociedad civil, los gobiernos de Francia y de México y muchos otros gobiernos, la Organización de Naciones Unidas, pensamos en este foro tan importante, Foro Generación Igualdad. He dicho y ahora lo ratifico que la política exterior mexicana es feminista, que la política exterior mexicana está dedicada a construir las libertades y construir la igualdad en todo el mundo, y para eso tienes que ser feminista. No se puede tener un objetivo de construir una sociedad distinta y no estar del lado de las causas en favor de la igualdad de género. Bueno, pues ahora con la pandemia tenemos que hacer muchísimo más y estamos dispuestos a hacerlo. Muchos países, organizaciones, sociedad civil, pero bueno, cuenten con nuestro compromiso. Les convocamos a participar en este foro por eso, porque es un momento histórico. Es algo diferente lo que estamos viviendo porque nuestro reto creció mucho. Es un reto importante y necesitamos de todas y de todos. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Your Excellency. And as you mentioned, we cannot aim to build a better society without being on the side of gender equality. We're already so excited about the launch of the forum in Mexico City in just a few weeks. There is no doubt that the state of France has been and continues to be perceived as a leader in supporting gender equality and women's empowerment. As a co-host of the forum, we are really happy to give the floor now to the French Minister for Gender Equality, Diversity and Equal Opportunities, Her Excellency Élisabeth Moreno.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je suis ravie de m'exprimer devant vous dans le cadre de cet événement organisé par le secrétaire général de l'ONU, que je remercie pour son engagement personnel en faveur de l'égalité entre les femmes et les hommes. En cette journée internationale particulière des droits des femmes, nous sommes toutes et tous conscients que nous vivons une situation grave et exceptionnelle pour les droits des femmes et des filles au niveau mondial. La double crise sanitaire et économique que nous traversons les impacte de manière disproportionnée. Les femmes sont en première ligne dans la réponse à la pandémie, mais subissent de plein fouet ses conséquences économiques et sociales. Elles sont aussi victimes de cette pandémie de l'ombre, que sont les violences sexistes et sexuelles et qui ont augmenté considérablement avec le confinement. Quand le président de la République française, Emmanuel Macron, a décidé d'accueillir conjointement avec le Mexique et sous l'égide d'ONU Femmes le forum Génération Égalité en 2020, dans le cadre de notre diplomatie féministe, la crise n'était pas encore celle que nous connaissons aujourd'hui. Face à cette situation inédite, il est évident que le forum est devenu plus important que jamais et qu'il doit constituer une réponse collective et ambitieuse aux défis auxquels les femmes et les filles sont confrontées. La réussite du forum Génération Égalité dépend de tous et de toutes. Nous ne cherchons pas de grands discours ni de déclarations de principe. Nous souhaitons des engagements concrets, novateurs et collectifs à travers les 6 coalitions d'action qui seront lancées à Paris. Nous tenons également à démontrer que des nouvelles manières de faire sont possibles, plus collaboratives et inclusives, entre les gouvernements, la société civile et les organisations féministes, et en particulier la jeunesse, le secteur privé, les fondations et les organisations internationales. Avec ce forum, nous mettons en œuvre le renouveau du multilatéralisme appelé de ses vœux par le président Emmanuel Macron et nos partenaires. Ce renouveau, c'est un multilatéralisme par les actes. Et je remercie les champions des coalitions qui ont accepté de répondre à cet appel et qui travaillent depuis plusieurs mois pour identifier des actions concrètes à mener pour faire avancer durablement l'égalité entre les femmes et les hommes. Je suis certaine qu'ils seront rejoints bientôt par de nombreux partenaires qui, eux aussi, veulent apporter leur pierre à l'édifice de la génération égalité. Nous les accueillerons à bras ouverts. La France prendra bien sûr, elle aussi, ses responsabilités. En tant que coprésidente du forum, elle sera au rendez-vous pour en faire un moment unique. Quelles que soient les contraintes qui pèsent sur l'organisation des événements internationaux, mais aussi en tant que championne de la coalition sur le droit à disposer de son corps et sur les droits sexuels et reproductifs, en prenant des engagements forts et ambitieux. Je voudrais conclure, et c'est particulièrement important en cette journée internationale, en remerciant celles et ceux qui œuvrent sans relâche, parfois au péril de leur vie, pour défendre les droits des femmes et des filles. Je pense à ces défenseurs des droits, comme Loujine Al-Hatloul, dont nous saluons la sortie de prison, même si sa liberté reste entravée. Beaucoup d'autres femmes sont toujours enfermées à travers le monde pour avoir remis en cause des systèmes de domination patriarcale. Pensons aussi à toutes celles qui sont descendues dans la rue ces derniers mois, en Europe comme ailleurs, pour avoir le droit de recourir à un avortement, de choisir quand et si elles souhaitent avoir un enfant, et ainsi de pouvoir librement disposer de leur corps. Le Forum Génération Égalité sera avant tout le leur. Je vous remercie et je vous souhaite d'excellents échanges.
Merci beaucoup, Your Excellency, for the commitment of France and the difference that you personally continue to make for women around the world. And thank you for acknowledging the shadow pandemic, which is the violence that women face that has increased during the confinement periods. Thank you as well for paying tribute to women human rights defenders who have lost their lives and to those who organize every day, sometimes risking prison, for human rights such as the right to safe abortion and to our bodily autonomy. As the Generation Equality Center's civil society leadership, we are happy to have with us next Zoneziwoh Mbondgulo-Wondieh, representative of the Civil Society Advisory Group to the Generation Equality Forum.
In 1995, the world witnessed the power of women's collective leadership, combined with cross-border solidarity, resulting to the adoption of the Beijing Declaration, a landmark document which set the pace for achieving gender justice as soon as possible. We are now 26 years after the adoption of the Beijing Declaration, and we are still not close towards realizing gender justice. And to make matters worse, we've been attacked by the worst health pandemic, COVID-19. Besides increasing numbers of disasters resulting from climate change, humanitarian emergencies, protracted armed conflicts, all of these impeding in realizing women's leadership and meaningful participation. This 2021, as we celebrate the International Women's Day, we must not forget that we are still far from achieving the set goals in the Beijing Declaration. And also, as we galvanize towards the Generation Equality Forums coming up in March in Mexico and in Paris in June, we must not lose focus towards accelerating efforts like never before in increasing women's voices, leadership, and agency. For the Generation Equality Forums provides us, the CSEC members, core group members, multi-stakeholders, members of parliaments, government leaders, philanthropists, traditional leaders, women and girls. It provides us all an opportunity to consult with everyone, women and girls across the board, irrespective of their diversity, age, status, academic background, clans, to ensure that no one is left behind in these processes, and to ensure that we be the first generation to be serious about realizing an equal future for all. Thank you.
Thanks, Zoneziwoh. It was great to hear from you. And to repeat what you said, I'm quoting, "We must not lose focus towards accelerating efforts like never before in increasing women's voices, leadership, and agency." Absolutely. And yes, when we say women, we mean all women and all their diversity. So thank you so much for this important reminder. We have been inspired by the thousands of young people and activists who have led gender equality in social justice movements around the world. Their leadership is now a defining aspect of the forum. We are thrilled to have with us next Chamathya, Fernando, and Anika Jane Dorothy, Youth Task Force representatives of the Generation Equality Forum.
I am Anika JD, a Youth Task Force representative to the Generation Equality Core Group. I come from Nairobi in Kenya, and as we all know, 2020 was supposed to be the year that gender equality was supposed to be firmly re-established and reintegrated into our day-to-day living and policy formulation. That notwithstanding, with the challenges we faced with COVID, worry not, 2021 is here. And in the year 2021, we are finally going to launch the Generation Equality Forum, starting in Mexico, then finally in Paris. We invite you all to join us in this momentous occasion. As a young woman, and a young woman specifically in politics and leadership, I am more than pleased and impressed to be part of this momentous occasion. The Generation Equality Forum creates a momentous occasion for us all to galvanize, consolidate, and march forward in the fight for gender equality. Feminism and gender equality is not just a belief system, it is a way of life. That is why we must all be feminists, as Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie says. Let us not lose this opportunity to contribute to our future as young people. I am excited to bring together the National Gender Youth Activists, the Youth Action Coalition leaders, and the Generation Equality Global Youth Task Force in championing for the fights of the youth, the agendas of the youth, like institutionalization of young people's leadership, girls' education, human trafficking for girls and young children across the world, and so many more. You cannot afford to be left behind. International Women's Day, we youth are leading with you. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Chamathya Fernando from Sri Lanka. As a Generation Equality Youth Task Force representative to the core group, together with my fellow Youth Task Force members, we wish you all a happy International Women's Day. Generation Equality Forum and Campaign is a path-breaking effort to bring together governments, private sector, civil society, youth, and all change makers from across the world to make concrete and ambitious efforts to achieve gender equality. Adolescents and young people are at the center of the agenda, and all youth leaders in different structures of the forum are leading path-breaking efforts to ensure that we can put together a strong commitment to achieve gender equality. Generation Equality Forum and Campaign will bring together women and girl leaders to lead the path. And at this critical moment with COVID-19 pandemic, we saw how women and girl leaders led the efforts to effective recovery and response from the pandemic situation. In honoring that leadership, we invite all women and girl leaders to join hands and bring together your best to ensure that we start this groundbreaking, intergenerational, multi-stakeholder effort to achieve gender equality in the next 5 years.
Thank you so much, Chamathya and Anika. You and the entire Youth Task Force continue to be an inspiration to the world. Indeed, girls and young women are leading the way towards a more inclusive and holistic, gender-just and equal world. Thank you also to all the speakers who shared their key messages with us today. Let us now continue with our programming on generation equality. Progress towards gender equality is under pressure. Without action, we risk regressing on the important gains made since the adoption of the landmark Platform for Action in Beijing. The COVID-19 pandemic is also exacerbating the situation, threatening the achievement of the 2030 Development Goals, the SDGs. But together, we have the power to change this through dedicated, bold efforts that builds on our breakthroughs, learns from our shortcomings, and engages new and diverse audiences. The COVID-19 pandemic has made it clear that incremental change is not enough anymore, and that only a collective, innovative, and accountability-based action can advance gender equality and rebuild a more equal, inclusive, and sustainable world. The action coalitions stand poised to build this new world. As a global, innovative, and multi-stakeholder platform bringing together more than 90 stakeholders, the Generation Equality Action Coalitions will drive concrete change at scale. We are happy to share now a video presentation introducing this vision.
Progress for gender equality is under pressure. Without action, we risk regressing on the important gains made since the landmark Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. The COVID-19 pandemic is exacerbating the situation, threatening the achievement of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. But together, we have the power to change this. It will take a dedicated, bold effort that builds on our breakthroughs, learns from our shortcomings, and engages new and diverse audiences of all ages. This is the vision of the Generation Equality Action Coalitions. Action Coalition leaders from member states, civil society, youth-led organizations, private companies, philanthropies, and international organizations have been working together on an implementation plan to accelerate action for gender equality. And now is the time for you to join this effort. Each Action Coalition will put forward a set of concrete, ambitious, and immediate actions to accelerate progress towards gender equality in the next 5 years. The themes cover gender-based violence, economic justice and rights, bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights, feminist action for climate justice, technology and innovation for gender equality, and feminist movements and leadership. In addition, a compact on women, peace and security and humanitarian action will work to drive action and resources towards women and girls in conflict and crisis settings. So how can you engage with the Action Coalitions? By making a commitment. Women's and feminist organizations, youth-led organizations and other civil society actors, governments, philanthropies, international organizations and private sector companies are invited to join the Action Coalitions as commitment makers. Commitment makers will support the finalisation of the Action Coalition blueprints, make bold and transformative commitments to one or several action coalitions, play a catalytic role in supporting the implementation and monitoring of blueprint actions, and mobilise other stakeholders around the Action Coalition theme and blueprint. This implementation will be reviewed on an annual basis. Now is the time to act for equal and to make gender equality a reality. Building back green, equitable, gender-responsive and inclusive societies is possible. Generation Equality and its action coalitions are ready to be part of the transformation to a bold and gender-equal future. With our collective power and commitment, we can make this happen.
Doesn't this all sound very exciting? To summarize, the Action Coalitions are a global, innovative, multi-stakeholder initiative, and each Action Coalition aims to put forward a set of concrete, ambitious, and immediate actions over the next 5 years to accelerate progress towards gender equality in 6 critical themes. Now, we will have a chance to hear from 6 leaders of the different Action Coalitions who will share some exciting reflections on each of the thematic areas. After that, we will have a special message by Eva Longoria and a fantastic performance by Broadway stars. We are honored to have with us today, to start, Madam Faith Kesiva from the State Department for Gender in Kenya and a leader of the Gender-Based Violence Action Coalition. Madam Kesiva, what are the key actions needed to drive much-needed change to create a world in which women and girls, in all their diversity, are able to live lives free from gender-based violence?
Thank you, Sophia, and happy International Women's Day to you all. And thank you for your question. I would like to deliver a statement in response to your question on behalf of the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence. COVID-19 has highlighted significant inequalities both within and between countries. The pandemic has shined a spotlight on the long-standing shadow pandemic of gender-based violence and discrimination against women and girls. In almost every country, and we've had this throughout this session, is that there has been increased reports of forms of gender-based violence. This include increase in harmful practices such as female genital mutilation and child early and forced marriage, which threaten to reverse hard-won gains on gender equality. Financial and political investments in ending all forms of gender-based violence and women and girls are needed urgently. Importantly, we must invest in women's rights organizations and movements working in the forefront to prevent and respond to gender-based violence so that they are enabled and empowered. We must invest in evidence-driven prevention strategies and in the police, justice, health, and social services for survivors. The Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence presents an opportunity, very important opportunity for diverse stakeholders to get on board and make game-changing commitments which will accelerate progress and drive the world forward towards the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals. The complementarity of the work of the Action Coalition on GBV within the work of the 5 Action Coalition also represents a unique opportunity for acceleration of an integrated cross-sectorial approach on gender-based violence. As a leader of the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence, the Government of Kenya stands in solidarity with all leaders, government, civil society organization, international organization, youth-led organization, and the private sector in its commitment to the key actions agreed upon by the leaders and outlined as needed to drive much needed change to create a world in which women and girls in all their diversity are able to live lives free from all forms of gender-based violence. This includes the following 4 key actions. First, that more states and regional actors ratify international and regional conventions and public and private sector institutions strengthen, implement, and finance evidence-driven laws, policies, and action plans to end gender-based violence against women and girls in all their diversity. In so doing, 550 million more women and girls will live in countries with laws and policies prohibiting all forms of gender-based violence against women and girls by 2026. Secondly, we must scale up implementation and financing of evidence-driven prevention strategies by public and private sector institutions and women rights organizations to drive down prevalence of gender-based violence at adolescents, girls, and young women in all their diversity, including in humanitarian setting. In so doing, we hope to see an increase by 50% of the number of countries that include one or more evidence-driven prevention strategies on gender-based violence against women and girls in their national policies, at least by 2026. Third, scaling up implementation and financing of coordinated survivor-centered, comprehensive, quality, accessible, and affordable services for survivors of gender-based violence, women and girls in all their diversity, including in humanitarian setting. In so doing, again, more women and girls will live in countries with multi-sectorial action plans on GBV, which include provision of police, justice, health, and social sector services by 2026. Finally, enhancing support and increasing accountability, as well as quality, flexible funding from state, private sector, foundations, and other donors to autonomous girl-led and women rights organizations working to end gender-based violence against women and girls in all their diversity. In so doing, we will progressively improve and increase international funding by 50% to women rights organizations, activists, and movements, including those working to address gender-based violence against women and girls, again, in all their diversity by 2026. Sophia, that is a commitment of the action leaders from the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Kasiva, for sharing this strong statement and reminding us of the importance of the ratification of international and regional conventions, of financing evidence-driven laws, policies, and strategies to drive down gender-based violence, of scaling up and financing survivor-centered services, and of course, increasing the accountability and financing to girl-led gender-based violence organizations. Thank you for this. We are now honored to give the floor to His Excellency Jarmo Sareva, the Ambassador for Innovation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland, and a leader of the Action Coalition on Technology and Innovation for Gender Equality. Ambassador Sareva, how can this Action Coalition drive the world towards a more equal and inclusive digital transformation? And what are the bold collective commitments that will drive change?
Well, thank you, Sophia, and happy International Women's Day from Helsinki. Indeed, I have the privilege of delivering these remarks on behalf of the Action Coalition on Technology and Innovation for Gender Equality. Now, as we know, technology and innovation has transformed our world. How we work, how we learn, how we communicate with each other. The digital revolution represents one of the biggest opportunities for women and girls, but also includes risks if we don't ensure that this change enhances gender equality. With COVID-19, many gender divides, including the digital one, are increasingly at risk to widen. The time is now not only to reverse these trends, but also to boost efforts to accelerate progress by doubling investment in gender transformative solutions and halving the gender digital divide by 2026. We, co-leaders of this Action Coalition, envision a world in which in 2026, women and girls in all their diversity have equal opportunity to safely and meaningfully use, lead, and design technology and innovation, where women and girls have equal access to digital technologies and universal digital literacy, where more women and girls are studying STEM, also encouraged by inspiring role models. Therefore, we envision a world where the proportion of women working in technology and innovation has doubled, including by setting up networks that connect talents and ensure a better representation of women. Finally, where increased investment into feminist technology and innovation will allow us to better respond to women's and girls' most pressing needs and to support women innovators. Crucially, we want a world free of online and tech-facilitated gender-based violence and discrimination. This will not be possible without governments and big tech companies implementing the necessary policies and solutions. The role of the private sector is essential to uproot the scourge of online gender-based violence and misogyny from our digital commons. We cannot afford one half of the humanity leaving digital spaces for fear of intimidation or worse. To achieve this vision described above, we need a structural change, a cultural change. Harmful gender stereotypes must be eradicated, and in this, the engagement of men and boys is crucial. We need men as allies. We also have to pay special attention to women and girls in vulnerable positions and situations. The current efforts to bridge the gender digital divide cannot afford to stall now. We must be united because moving past the COVID-19 pandemic will require extraordinary collaboration and solidarity among people, organizations, and countries. We call for collective awareness and responsibility from all actors to take action now. It is time to innovate for gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Sareva, for laying out this vision for a more equal and inclusive digital transformation. And just to highlight what you said here, the reality that we are living this digital revolution, right? But with divides that might increase and the risk, but also the opportunities that comes with it. The importance of doubling investment. Thank you for this commitment. Doubling investments to half the digital divide within 5 years. And of course, to increase funding in feminist tech and inventions. Thank you for this. We are happy to now give the floor to Madam Sivananthi Thanentiran, the Executive Director of the Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women, ARROW, and the leader of the Action Coalition on Bodily Autonomy and Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. Madam Thanentiran, what can you tell us about this Action Coalition and what will it deliver and what is needed to advance its vision and commitments?
Thank you, Sophia. Our vision is to work together with all partners, including strong leaders from young people's, women's, and feminist organizations and movements, to ensure that girls, adolescents, and women in all of our diversity are empowered and supported to exercise our sexual and reproductive health and rights and make autonomous decisions about our bodies, free from coercion, violence, and discrimination. While some progress has been made towards achieving global commitments to SRHR, it is a stark truth that every day around the world, girls and women face practical barriers, discrimination, and stigma when seeking to fulfill these basic human rights. In some areas, we are even seeing backlash and regression in access to essential high-quality SRHR services. SRHR and bodily autonomy remain the unfinished agenda of the Beijing Platform for Action, and yet it is the one agenda that can accelerate action in all other areas of gender equality. To truly realize bodily autonomy and SRHR, 4 principles must infuse our work as a global community. First, a rights-based approach. Fulfilling the right to health means that comprehensive SRHR services must be available, accessible, acceptable, and of high quality. Second, an intersectional approach means meeting the holistic needs of diverse girls and women without any form of discrimination. Third, intercultural approaches to protect the rights of indigenous people to their traditional medicines, health practices, and co-design of health services, but do not support denying women and girls their bodily autonomy and SRHR in the name of culture or tradition. Fourth, and finally, we must leave no one behind. Inequality and discrimination based on age, sexual orientation, gender identity, ethnicity, ability, class, amongst others, negatively affect access to care and services and result in poor sexual and reproductive health outcomes. And these inequalities have only deepened during the COVID-19 pandemic. Urgent action is needed. Over the past 9 months, our multi-stakeholder leadership team, comprised of governments, women's, feminist and youth-led organizations, international organizations, and the private sector, have worked to identify the most urgent gaps in evidence-based, scalable, game-changing tactics to accelerate action. First, all stakeholders must increase delivery of comprehensive, gender-responsive, human rights promoting sexuality education in and out of school with the aim of reaching 50 million more children, adolescents, and youth by 2026. Second, within a comprehensive SRHR framework, we want to increase the quality of and access to contraceptive services for 50 million more adolescent girls and women and support removal of restrictive policies and legal barriers, ensuring that by 2026, 50 million more adolescent girls and women live in jurisdictions where they can access safe and legal abortion. We also want to act for the 55% of adolescent girls and women who can't currently make their own decisions about having sex, accessing contraception, or seeking health care. We must enact legal and policy change, transform gender and social norms, and increase knowledge of rights so that 260 million more girls, adolescents, and women are empowered to make autonomous decisions about their bodies, sexuality, and reproduction, and to end harmful practices like FGMC and child marriage and unions. Finally, to make our common vision a reality, it is essential to increase accountability to, participation of, and financial support available for autonomous feminist and women's rights organizations who are working to promote and protect bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights. Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you. No, thank you for this very comprehensive answer, and also for sharing the importance of a rights-based, intersectional, and intercultural approach, and how this will allow us to leave no one behind. It's so great also to hear you talk about the importance of comprehensive sexual education, of quality access to contraceptive services, to making sure that girls and young women and everyone in general can really have the rights, the legal framework, and the social norms around them to be able to make autonomous decisions, and of course, very important, funding for autonomous women's rights organizations. So thank you so much for these excellent points, Madam Sananthiran. Thank you. We are now honored to now pass on the floor to Madam Rosita Najimi, who is the Senior Director and Head of Global Social Innovation at PayPal and a leader of the Action Coalition on Economic Justice and Rights. So Madam Najimi, how can this Action Coalition realize economic justice and rights for women and girls in our world today?
Thank you, Sophia. Our global economy still does not work for women and girls, despite the commitments made 26 years ago in Beijing. Evidence shows how women continue to be excluded from economic opportunities on an equal footing as men. Today's economies and institutions fail to benefit from the full potential of women. By the data, women are disadvantaged on multiple fronts. Women all over the world still spend triple the amount of time as men performing unpaid care and domestic work, and continue to subsidize the global economy, with unpaid wages estimated at $10.8 trillion a year. In the formal sector, women's participation gap is 31% and has stagnated for the past 20 years. In fact, young women are 3 times more likely than young men to be outside the labor force and not in school. Today, 740 million women globally work in the informal sector, facing uncertainty, low earnings, and harsh conditions. And while 71% of the world's population lacks access to social protection, women are particularly disadvantaged in these systems. But ladies and gentlemen, these are the pre-pandemic figures. The reality is probably worse. We now know women's jobs globally have been 1.8 times more vulnerable to the pandemic as men's jobs. Women's caring burden increased by a further 30 to 40% since the beginning of the pandemic. And by the end of 2021, around 435 million women and girls will live on less than $1.90 a day. The insufficient and fragile progress over the past 26 years, combined with the socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19, require urgent and bold action to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. This reality is what jolts the Economic Justice and Rights Action Coalition. We urge economic institutions and all actors to once and for all respond to these injustices. These challenges can only be tackled and overcome together. Civil society groups, feminist movements, citizens, governments, businesses, international organizations, and researchers, we all must do our part. We call upon leaders from across the globe. Join us. We must urgently design and implement measures to recognize, reduce, redistribute unpaid care and domestic work, ensure representation of women care workers, and reward paid care work. We must expand equal opportunities and improve the quality of work for women, including the fundamental rights to organize and bargain collectively, realize decent work in both formal and informal economies, and prepare adequately for the world of work. We must ensure women's access to and control of productive resources and strengthen women's entrepreneurship. And we must design and implement gender transformative budget reforms and economic investment plans that change an unequal and unfair global economic and financial architecture to one that promotes the well-being of all people and planet. No one can dispute the inequality data. It is clear, but so is the evidence base for the promise of gender equality. Countering the pandemic's regressive effects alone could show $13 trillion in global GDP gains by 2030. Inspired by this year's theme on women's leadership, this next generation of women and girls will be heads of state, CEOs, leading economists, and helming social justice movements. When they do the accounting, they will see the pronounced dip in progress in 2020. They will also trace their fingers upward along a steep growth in progress that reflects the rapid acceleration made possible by new game-changing commitments and actions that we all make in the coming months. Join us to ensure both an accelerated recovery and still faster ascent.
Thank you so much, Madam Najimi, for sharing really this inspiring. Your intervention was quite inspiring, and I was trying to write down all the figures, and I'm just like, wow, we have a long way to go, but you have a plan, and the coalitions have a plan, and this is why we're here today. So just thank you also for highlighting. I think it's important sometimes to put the data and the monetary figures to things. So I thank you for that. Of course, you mentioned the importance of multi-stakeholder work, also how it's important to expand equal opportunities, including bargaining rights. Also to strengthen entrepreneurship, and of course, gender-sensitive budgeting. So thank you so much for sharing how institutions can work together to make economic justice and rights a reality for women and girls.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sophia.
We are now honored to give the floor to Madam Kavita Ramdas, who is the director of the Women's Rights Program at Open Society Foundation and a leader of the Action Coalition on Feminist Movements and Leadership. So, Madam Ramdas, what are the most important actions that this coalition will take to ensure the full participation of women and girls in all aspects of public life?
Thank you, Sophia, and it's been so inspiring for us already to be hearing the incredible voices and partnerships that we've been listening to. The Open Society Foundations extends our salams and namastes to everybody this International Women's Day, and is very privileged to co-lead the Action Coalition on Feminist Movements and Leadership, with our colleagues from civil society, member states, international organizations, and the private sector. I think we're collectively putting forward a vision for transformative feminist leadership of women and girls in all aspects of public life. Where does it start? I think it starts in our exercise of our own voice, power, and agency. Voices that have long been silenced or shushed need to be heard. Agency speaks to our ability to act for ourselves, to make decisions for ourselves. And power is never given, it is innate in each of us. It is what allows us to speak, act, and lead. So for us, the Action Coalition is all about what I call the Fierce Four: intersectional power, money, space, and leaders. Intersectional power. Women and girls are reclaiming the power of our own bodies so that we can have power in the body politic. We are lifting up, as our former speaker just said, the power of care and building caring economies, recognizing the labor that nurtures communities and the planet and that offers just and sustainable economic systems. We are also strengthened by the power of us coming together as a collective to challenge the status quo and to push for long-lasting change. But how we do it is just as important. The poet and feminist Audre Lorde reminded us that we do not live single-issue lives. So how could our movements and our struggles and our solutions be anything but intersectional? We are women, yes, but we are also Black and brown and indigenous and working class and trans and queer and Latinx and Asian and African and from the Middle East and a myriad of other powerful identities. Our issues are also intersectional. So we know that achieving economic justice requires the freedom to live free of violence. It requires decision-making power over our own bodies and our political voice and participation. So too, political freedom and voice requires much more just economic structures that reject market fundamentalism and acknowledge the care work upon which all other economic activity depends. And the health of the planet depends. And finally, we don't live isolated from our fellow beings or from our Mother Earth, and our ability to be agents of change and drive transformation therefore requires both individual freedom as well as collective action. 2, where does the money come from? Money makes the world go round. Resilient feminist activism deserves and demands stable and flexible financial capital and resources that allow movement and actors to respond nimbly to opportunities and challenges. Our Action Coalition proposes to prioritize increased direct funding and support for feminist and women-led organizations, activists, and movements in all their diversity, but especially in partnership with women's funds, which are closest to the ground and can get money out quickly and effectively. We are particularly committing specific flexible financial technical resources for adolescent girls and young feminist leaders, something about which you, Sophia, know well, having led in your board capacity at FRIDA, another amazing young feminist fund. Third, space. Not just the expedition to Mars, in which women were really an important part, but reclaiming our space on this planet. We intend to expand and protect civic space, physical public space, online space, and policy space, because our movements are fought in all of those spaces. We want to make sure that women take up the space where we can advocate for human rights and gender justice in both public and private spheres. And last, but by no means least, we know that women and girls in all our diversity are not just participating in the decisions that will shape a future world, but are leading that change. They are on the vanguard of all aspects of public life. To make that real, we must ensure more power and equality inside our private life so that care burdens, as I think the Prime Minister earlier in this event mentioned, are equally shared within households. We need feminists leading not only in government, but also in the private sector, in civil society, and in our public institutions. We are so done with token appointments. That is so 20th century. We want gender parity by 2030 and full participation by all. And we will build institutions with strong gender mainstreaming mandates and capacities, and we will hold them to account. We are ready to build partnerships that will ensure gender transformative, inclusive, feminist laws, policies, and social norms. We're excited to do this together, and we welcome all of you to join us in this process. It takes a village, and in this case, perhaps it takes a whole world. Happy International Women's Day to all of you, and we look forward to working together.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your for your words here. Gosh, I could summarize everything and just repeat everything you just said, but really the importance of transformative leadership, feminist leadership, absolutely in all aspects of public lives. I love how you broke down and how your action coalition is really focusing on intersectional power, and great quote by Audre Lorde, by the way. How we must be reminded that all oppressions are connected, and at the same time we can all work together to make sure that no one is left behind. The importance also of this stable and flexible funding for activists, for feminist groups, for girl-led initiatives, for trans-led initiatives, for movements, absolutely. And of course, you mentioned the issue of space, how we need to take up more space. We already do, but we need to continue taking up more space in civic, public, online, and policy spaces. And of course, as you finished on leaders and how girls and women are leading the change, and how really, I like that you mentioned the importance of also how we need to work on it on our private lives, not just the private sector and civil society and government, of course, all of this, but what can we do? What can all of you watching today, what can you do today after this event in your private life to make sure that this is a reality? So thank you so much for your remarks.
It's great. Wonderful to be with you.
Yes, thank you. Now we'll move on to, we're really, really excited to hear also from Madam Juanita Babire, who is from Girls for Climate Uganda and a leader of the Action Coalition on Feminist Actions for Climate Justice. So, Madam Babire, why does feminist action matter for climate justice? And how will this Action Coalition advance this vision through its commitments?
Thank you so much. Extremely honored to be delivering this statement on behalf of the Feminist Action for Climate Justice. Feminist action matters for climate justice because equality for women and girls will strengthen our collective ability to solve the climate crisis. Women and girls have always been at the forefront of movements demanding climate and environmental justice, and their leadership can change what it means to be an effective leader. Climate justice recognizes that the fight for environmental sustainability is not separate from the fight for social justice. Climate justice centralizes the needs of people who are the most marginalized, the most impoverished, rural indigenous women, for example, who live directly on land and take care of families and are most impacted by natural disasters. Women and girls are more vulnerable to climate impacts, but are already creating and leading solutions at all levels. Their unique knowledge and skills can help make the response to climate change more effective and sustainable. This is why defending women's and girls' rights should be at the center of our climate activism. The Action Coalition intends to increase political advocacy and financial support for the real solutions already being proposed and enacted by women and girls at front lines. Through its actions and commitments, the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Coalition will support a just transition to a green economy that is led by women and girls, that recognizes that climate change is not separate from gender justice, and protects and amplifies the voices of grassroots and indigenous communities, including frontline defenders across social and political arenas. We will work to increase direct access to financing for gender-just climate solutions, in particular for organizations led by women and girls at the grassroots and rural level. Financing institutions and the donor community will prioritize women's organizations as priority partners and be held accountable to shift capital to support resilient societies and investments in gender-just climate and ecosystem-based approaches. Women and girls need equal access to technologies and knowledge, equal access and control over natural resources for management and protection, including through securing land rights and ownership. We need to equally and meaningfully participate in decision-making processes at all levels to develop climate responses that center human rights. Finally, to achieve our goals, we need to be practical as well as visionary. We have to make women's and girls' needs and abilities visible in all climate and environment policies and plans by producing and using sex disaggregated data on the gender-environment nexus. Increasing the collection and analysis of sex disaggregated data would lead to climate policies that enable women and girls to fully benefit from them while making sure such policies do not exacerbate existing inequalities. The Feminist Action for Climate Justice invites us all stakeholders to join us on this path to make our vision of justice for all people and a healthy planet a reality. Happy International Women's Day to all of us, and thank you so much, Sophia.
No, thank you. Thank you to you. I love how you started this intervention saying, that we need to change what it means to be an effective leader, and the importance to center the most vulnerable and the most impacted by natural disasters. So thank you. I think that's a lot of food for thought for all of us at home today. And of course, the importance of supporting just transitions and green economy, and the green economy that has to be led by women and girls. Because as you said so clearly, climate justice cannot be separated from our struggle to gender equality. So I'm so happy that you and your coalition brought this to the discussion today. Important point also, you mentioned the shift of capital to gender just climate initiatives, and the importance of securing land rights and ownership. We can't stress this enough, the importance of securing land rights and ownership. And I'm quoting you again, how you said we have to be practical and visionary. I'm going to put this on my calendar for 2021. It's such a great way to start every day. We have to be practical and visionary, and also the importance of having sex disaggregated data, because that's really the only way that we can have climate a policy that will work also for women and girls and effectively leave no one behind. So thank you so much, Madam Babire, for this intervention.
Thank you too.
Okay, well, thank you to all of you. Thank you for everyone on this incredible panel, all of you leaders, for joining us for this discussion today and for sharing more about all of the different visions for the action coalitions. I think all of us at home today are just really inspired and motivated. So thank you so much. Thanks for your remarks. In addition to the action coalitions, the Generation Equality Forum will also launch an innovative compact for women, peace and security and humanitarian action. And this compact will focus on implementation of the existing normative framework on women, peace and security, and gender equality and humanitarian action. Through a voluntary monitoring and accountability process, this compact will prioritize key actions for implementation in the next 5 years by member states, regional organizations, UN agencies, civil society organizations, academia, and the private sector also. And already over 30 partners have joined this movement for action. We're therefore really fortunate to hear from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Mr. Filippo Grandi, on this compact. And we asked Mr. Grandi to reflect on the issues the compact can address and prioritize from this perspective of UNHCR as a board member of this compact.
This year's International Women's Day takes place at a time when women and girls face even greater challenges than in previous years. Risks of sexual violence and exploitation have escalated during the global health crisis. Cases of child marriage have increased, and there is a risk that 50% of refugee girls in secondary school may not continue with their education. It is important to strengthen the role of women and girls and to celebrate their tremendous efforts around the world in shaping a more equal future and recovery from the pandemic. we have inspiring stories of forcibly displaced women taking a leading role in fighting the virus and providing support to their refugee and host communities. At UNHCR, we're committed to ensuring the equal and meaningful participation of women in all decision-making, community management, and leadership structures, as well as in refugee committees. The Global Compact on Refugees, adopted by member states of the United Nations, hopes to transform the way the world responds to refugee situations and strengthen our cooperation with women-led organizations and ensure women's participation in peace processes. We commit to promote the role of refugee women not only in emergency situations, but in all refugee situations, including those sustained over generations. It is an imperative for UNHCR not only to respond to gender-based violence, but to recognize that this violence is rooted in power imbalances. To prevent violence against women, we have to ensure gender equality in all aspects of our work. We have done so in our policy prevention, risk mitigation and response, but we can do more. It is with great honor that UNHCR has become a board member of the Generation Equality Compact on Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action. And as such, UNHCR is committed to supporting and empowering forcibly displaced women. Women, including those displaced, can and will shape our future.
Thank you, Mr. Grandi, for sharing more information about the Compact and the importance of promoting the rights and access to education, and for supporting the leadership of refugee and forcibly displaced women and girls. Thank you as well for mentioning and highlighting the necessity of partnering with women-led organizations. You mentioned power, and we just spent 2 hours discussing gender equality, and I think it's a good reminder for us that unequal power dynamics are really at the root of most of our troubles today, especially when individuals and groups hoard power and abuse their power over others to maintain the status quo and perpetuate inequalities. So thank you for bringing that to our attention as well. So to close out this segment, we are honored to have with us a very special message from Golden Globe nominated and SAG Award winning actress, producer, director, philanthropist, and Time's Up founder, Eva Longoria. Eva is committed to leading the movement for diverse and female representation in Hollywood, the workplace, and beyond. In 2012, she created the Eva Longoria Foundation to help Latinas build better futures for themselves and their families through education and entrepreneurship. And it directly impacted more than 30,000 lives in the United States and in Mexico. So we're thrilled to have Eva share her thoughts on the importance of women's leadership in this COVID world, and to also have her lend her voice to the Generation Equality Forum and the work of the Action Coalitions, and of course, the Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action Compact.
During the pandemic, women have disproportionately borne the responsibility of keeping our world moving. In many countries, women are the majority of essential workers. And globally, 70% of healthcare workers and first responders are women. Other women have suffered disproportionate job losses, in part because unpaid care work has exploded. And women are now spending 15 more hours on unpaid labor every week than men. In economies of all sizes, women have seen their hours cut, their paychecks shrink, they've lost revenue from small businesses. It's more than a crisis of health and a crisis of finances. Rates of domestic violence are rising, and an estimated 11 million girls around the world will not return to school after the pandemic. So all told, we've lost so much ground in the movement for women's rights. And we know the pandemic didn't create gender inequality. It just exacerbated it. And these issues won't disappear once we have widespread vaccinations. But in the same way that 2020 forced us to restructure nearly every aspect of our life, we can use this as an opportunity to create a world built on principles and equality and justice. And this kind of systemic change has to come from the top down and the bottom up. That's why I'm here alongside the Executive Director of UN Women to help announce the Generation Equality Forum. We'll work with a global coalition to launch a series of transformative actions to achieve lasting progress toward gender equality. Because if we want to build a more inclusive world, we have to change the way we think about and invest in the movement. We have to prioritize the work of the historically marginalized women. I've spent my time as an activist working on issues that are important to Latina women. But our intersectional community benefits from the work that disabled women do for equitable healthcare, that LGBTQ women do for civil rights, that Black women do for economic justice, because our oppressions have the same roots, and our solidarity is the path to our liberation. So we have to make financial investments in the leadership of grassroots activists who've been fighting for the communities for a long time. We have to listen to and empower young women who have new ideas and energy to contribute to our movements. And we can build on the work that came before us and still leave stepping stones for the women who will follow us. Women are already leading, so it's on governments and companies and philanthropists and civil society organizations to recognize and respect that leadership, to invest in community-based solutions, to ensure women have a key role in all decision-making, big and small, that affects our collective future. And that's where Generation Equality Action Coalition comes in. Stakeholders from every sector that are committing to drive progress on issues that affect all women: gender-based violence, economic justice, bodily autonomy, climate justice, equitable technology, feminist leadership. Every coalition member is making financial, advocacy, and policy commitments for us to see meaningful change in this generation. And I'm so honored that the Eva Longoria Foundation will be a partner in Generation Equality's work on economic justice and rights. I started the foundation to help Latinas reach their full potential through education and entrepreneurship. And through our work in the United States and Mexico, I've seen firsthand what we can do when we bring women-led grassroots organizations and major companies to the table. We can accomplish much more together than we ever could alone, and our movement needs you. Yes, you. If you agree that 50% of the population deserves 50% of the power, then join us today by supporting Act for Equal, the campaign to renew and recommit ourselves to the fight for intersectional gender equality in the run-up to the Generation Equality Forum. Visit unwomen.org to understand where we are, where we're going, and how you can act for equal.
Thank you, Eva. I think you have inspired all of us to hashtag Act for Equal and take action in the lead up to the forums in Mexico and Paris. I'm glad you reinforced the fact that the pandemic did not create gender inequality, but that it exposed it and made it so much worse. And in fact, it's clear that over the past year, we have lost so many of the gains and advances that feminists fought for. It's also great to hear you emphasize that we need to finance and fund the work of women. Girl-led and young women-led initiatives and initiatives led by trans and non-binary people who work at the intersections of different oppressions and marginalizations know best what would really work in their communities to create a more just and equal world. And it's really up to all of us to support and amplify their work. We have now reached the final part of today's program. So to offer some closing remarks, I would like to warmly welcome back the Executive Director of UN Women, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. Over to you, Madam Executive Director.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for marking International Women's Day with us. It's certainly been an enjoyable morning. We have been reminded about the many challenges we face when it comes to recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. But we've also heard about many solutions. We've heard from the leaders of action, coalitions, member states, private sector, young people, civil society, UN family, about the things we can do. The pandemic brings many problems, but we too have solutions to the problems. We also know that it is important to include women in whatever actions we're going to take. The economic impacts on women, the gender-based violence impacts on women and girls, the challenge of needing digital skills all affect women disproportionately. It cannot be possible to address these issues when women are not part of decision-making bodies. Women are not represented enough in cabinets, with only 14 countries with gender-equal cabinet. Women are not represented enough as heads of states, with only 22 heads of states who are women. Women are not represented enough in task teams that are dealing with COVID. In 87 countries that we surveyed, only about 3.6% of the task teams that deal with COVID have gender-equal committees. So this is a challenge. We cannot have men be the only ones who are dealing with economic downturn, with gender-based violence, with addressing the issue of the lack of digital skills that women need. So this issue of representation of women in decision-making bodies, in cabinets where decisions are being made, is actually quite urgent. We are hoping that at CSW, you will follow up on these discussions and make sure that we make decisions, recommendations that will take us further. Last year, when we commemorated 25 years of the implementation of the Beijing platform, the heads of states lamented the underrepresentation of women in all areas. When we go to CSW, let us remember that our heads of state are concerned about the issue. This is the opportunity for us to make change. There is a correlation between slow progress in the advancement of gender equality and underrepresentation of women in decision-making bodies. It therefore becomes important that we begin to use the one instrument that we have, which has an impact in many other areas that are critical for gender equality. We also are excited that the work of generation equality has come thus far. We heard from the leaders of the Action Coalition. You heard Eva making an impassionate plea, inviting all of you to come there. All these are voices that are convinced about a future that can be brighter. Mexico Forum on the 29th to the 31st March 2021 is real, and it is here. And the Paris Forum on the 30th to the 2nd of July is real, and it is coming. So we expect you to do your bit to support this effort and to work with young people. I would like to end by thanking the UN Women team and everyone who helped us to host the event today, the wonderful speakers that we have, the moderators, those who announced groundbreaking commitments for generation equality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Executive Director. Inspiring as always. I'm feeling so energized and motivated thanks to all of these wonderful speakers today. Like such a great group of intergenerational speakers of diverse backgrounds and experiences, from young feminist activists to government officials. And I continue to feel this sense of urgency, as we cannot afford to wait any longer to make our world a more just and equal place. We have almost come to the end of this energizing and motivating event. But for generation equality, as Madam Executive Director just said, this is really just the beginning. And we encourage all of you to join us at the forum in Mexico and then in France. Now, to close our program, we have a musical treat that has become an anthem and a tradition. 10 years ago, a special song was created for the inauguration of the UN Women Agency. It's called One Women, And it's been performed live by some of Broadway's best performers at the UN headquarters in New York at the close of each International Women's Day observance. This year, of course, due to the pandemic, they have created a special video to close our program. Let's give it up for One Women.
In Kangali, she wakes up, she makes a choice in Hanoi, Natal, Ramallah. In Tangier, she takes a breath, lifts up her voice in Lahore, La Paz, Kampala. Though she's half a world away, something in me wants to say. Manila, Salta, and Boo. Though we're different as can be, we're connected, she with me. We are one woman, your courage keeps me strong. We are one woman, you sing, I sing along. We are one woman, your dreams are mine, and we shall shine. We shall shine. And one man hears her voice, and one man he fights her fight. Day by day, he lets go the old ways. One woman at a time. We are one woman, your victories lift us all. We are one woman, you rise and I stand tall. We are one woman, your world is mine, and we shall shine. We shall shine. We shall shine. Shine, shine, shine. And one man hears her voice, and one man fights her fight. Day by day, he lets go the old ways. Shine, shine,
Thank you. Gosh, thank you to these incredible Broadway singers. We shall shine. I love this. I love this. How beautifully, that this captures the hopes and the aspirations that we discussed today. Well, Thank you for everyone. Thank you to everyone who has made today possible, including all of you watching who have joined from so many different parts of the world, whether it was early morning or late at night. And thank you to each of our presenters and panelists and performers, as well as the team from UN Women. Thank you so much. And of course, the behind the scenes tech support crew who really put together today's event. So thank you so much to everyone. And happy International Women's Day.